A millionaire doctor offers an infertile woman a shocking proposal to marry him in exchange for a life-changing sum, but like everyone's story, things may not always go as planned. Dr. Lucas Sinclair's perfectly polished shoes made click-clack sounds against the floors of his fertility clinic as he made his final rounds. At 38, he embodied success. His credentials adorned the walls, and his name graced medical journals across the country. The evening sun painted golden streaks across his desk, where a single envelope lay unopened, bearing his grandmother's elegant handwriting. He knew what waited inside. Eleanor Sinclair never wrote without purpose, and her summons to the family estate that morning had made her intentions clear. The memory of their conversation made his jaw clench. "Your grandfather built this legacy through careful planning and proper values," she had said, her voice carrying the weight of generations. He would be disappointed to see his heir living without purpose, without family. Lucas had maintained his composure, even as she delivered her ultimatum. Marry within the year, or lose your inheritance and the family estate. The words rattled in his mind as he picked up the envelope. Inside lay the formal terms of her demand. Love held no appeal for Lucas. He'd seen too many marriages crumble in expensive divorces, watched too many colleagues lose everything to emotional entanglements. His own parents had proven that love was temporary. Money and success were permanent. His phone buzzed. Another message from his grandmother's lawyer requesting his response. Lucas turned to the wall of windows, surveying the city he'd conquered. The lights below twinkled like the diamonds he could afford, but never saw reason to buy. Everything in his life followed a careful plan, each success calculated and achieved through precision. Marriage, however, presented a problem he couldn't solve through medical expertise or financial power. Unless, the thought struck him as he glanced at the patient files on his desk. One name caught his attention, Olivia William. The memory of her appointment surfaced, a former concert pianist, her career destroyed by the same accident that left her unable to bear children. Her file painted a clear picture. Mounting medical bills, insurance claims denied, a woman of talent reduced to teaching basic piano lessons to survive. Lucas remembered how she'd received the news of her infertility. While other patients collapsed in tears or raged against fate, Olivia had simply asked, "What are my options?" Her pragmatic response had impressed him. He pulled up her file on his computer. No partner, no family support system, and a mountain of debt that would take years to overcome. Perfect. Morning found him parked outside her modest apartment building in a neighborhood that made his luxury car stand out like a pearl in gravel. He'd chosen to come early, knowing she taught lessons at a local music school. His research had been thorough, it always was. The security guard eyed him suspiciously until Lucas flashed his medical credentials. "Waiting for a patient," he explained smoothly. The guard nodded, returning to his newspaper. At precisely 7:30 a.m., Olivia William emerged from the building. Lucas observed her with clinical interest. Her clothes were well-maintained but worn, her leather bag scuffed at the corners. Yet she moved with remarkable composure, her posture speaking of years spent on stage. Dark hair caught the morning light, and though her circumstances had diminished, she carried an air of dignity that even poverty couldn't erase. The sight stirred something unexpected in Lucas' respect. Here was someone who understood survival, who faced reality without illusions. Someone who might appreciate a business arrangement for exactly what it was. He watched her check her phone, probably confirming her teaching schedule. Her fingers moved across the screen with the same grace they must have once shown on piano keys. Time to make his move. Lucas started his car, pulling smoothly alongside her as she walked toward the bus stop. The window moved smoothly as it lowered. "Ms. William," he called out, keeping his voice professional. "I have a proposition for you." She halted, recognition and wariness crossing her features. "Dr. Sinclair?" Her voice carried the same measured control he remembered. "What brings you to this part of town?" A business opportunity. One that could solve both our problems. He gestured to the passenger seat of his car. Allow me to explain over coffee? Olivia studied him for a long moment, her mind clearly weighing options and consequences. The same analytical approach she'd shown in his office. Finally, she adjusted the strap of her bag. I have a class in 40 minutes, she said. This won't take long, and I'll ensure you arrive on time. Another pause, another calculation. Very well. She opened the car door, settling into the leather seat with surprising ease. Though I must admit, house calls seem rather unusual for a fertility specialist. Lucas allowed himself a small smile as he pulled away from the curb. She had no idea how unusual things were about to become. The morning traffic parted before his car as he drove toward the cafe he'd selected, expensive enough to signal his seriousness, but quiet enough for a private conversation. He could feel her studying him, assessing the situation with the same precision he admired. Yes, Lucas thought, she would do perfectly. A woman who understood value, who could appreciate a clear contract without emotional complications. His grandmother had demanded a marriage, but she'd never specified what kind. As they approached the cafe, Lucas rehearsed his proposal in his mind. Every word chosen for maximum impact, every term calculated for mutual benefit. A business merger, essentially. Clean, simple, profitable for both parties. Yet something about Olivia's steady gaze and his peripheral vision suggested that nothing about this arrangement would be as simple as he planned. He pushed the thought aside. He was Dr. Lucas Sinclair, and he never lost control of any situation. The cafe waited ahead, and with it, the beginning of a most unusual negotiation. The coffee shop sat on a quiet corner in the West Village, its worn brick exterior and foggy windows offering refuge from Manhattan's morning rush. Inside, brass fixtures glowed warmly against dark wood panels, and the aroma of fresh coffee mingled with the sweetness of baked bread. Lucas had chosen well. The place was empty enough for privacy, yet public enough to keep their meeting professional. Olivia wrapped her hands around her untouched cappuccino, watching the foam design slowly dissolve. The cup's delicate china pattern reminded her of the tea sets her mother once collected, before medical bills had forced them to sell everything. 3 tables away, a barista hummed while arranging pastries, the melody tugging at Olivia's musician's ear, Bach's Minuet in G slightly off-key. I'll be direct, Lucas said, his voice cutting through her thoughts. I need a wife. The words hung in the air between them. Olivia studied the man across the table, his precisely knotted tie, the expensive watch on his wrist, the way he held himself like someone accustomed to commanding rooms full of people. She had seen him only once before, in his office, when he had delivered the news that had shattered her dreams of motherhood. A wife, he continued, laying out his proposal with zero cares in the world. In name only. My grandmother is threatening to cut me off unless I marry. I'm offering you a deal. Marry me, play the part in public, and in return, I'll ensure you never have to worry about money again. Her laugh escaped before she could stop it, sharp and disbelieving. Through the window, she watched a young couple pass by, their fingers intertwined, sharing a secret joke. What would they think of this conversation? Lucas pulled a folder from his briefcase, spreading documents across the table. Bank statements, medical bills, legal papers, her entire financial life laid bare in black and white. He had done his research thoroughly. The largest figure caught her eye, the remaining balance on her hospital bills, a sum that would take her decades to repay on a piano teacher's salary. 1 year, he said, tapping the contract with his Mont Blanc pen. That's all I need. In exchange, I'll pay off your medical bills and establish a music scholarship in your name. Enough funding to help other young musicians for years to come. Olivia's fingers moved unconsciously, playing phantom piano keys against her leg, a nervous habit from her conservatory days. The scholarship caught her attention. How many talented students had she watched drop out of her community classes because they couldn't afford to continue? "Why me?" she asked, meeting his gaze. The morning light through the window illuminated half his face, leaving the other in shadow. "You understand loss," he replied. "You know life doesn't always follow the path we expect. I need someone practical, someone who won't confuse this arrangement with romance." The barista's radio switched to Chopin's Raindrop Prelude, her signature piece from her last concert before the accident. Olivia closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the spotlight, the perfect acoustics of the concert hall, the standing ovation. All gone now. Lucas continued outlining the terms: separate bedrooms, coordinated public appearances, a prenuptial agreement protecting his assets. She would have use of his guest house, a monthly allowance, and complete medical coverage. In return, she would play the role of devoted wife at social events, accompany him to business functions, and maintain absolute discretion about the nature of their arrangement. The contract stretched to 40 pages, each clause carefully worded to prevent any possibility of emotional entanglement. Olivia read every line, her training as a musician making her attentive to the smallest details. No physical intimacy required. No expectations of love or companionship. A business merger in all but name. Through the window, she watched the city wake up. A street vendor arranged flowers in copper buckets. A taxi driver helped an elderly woman with her groceries. A child pressed his nose against a bakery window, pointing at chocolate croissants. All these little moments of genuine human connection, none of them would have place in the life Lucas proposed. Yet what was the alternative? Her landlord had already hinted at raising her rent. The community center was cutting back on music programs. Her physical therapy sessions, crucial for maintaining what mobility she had regained, ate through her savings each month. "The choice is yours," Lucas said, checking his watch. "But I need an answer now. Time is valuable, Ms. William." Olivia picked up the pen, crushed by how heavy it felt in her trembling hands. She thought of her mother, who had sacrificed everything to support her daughter's musical dreams. What would she say about this pragmatic exchange of vows? Would she understand that sometimes survival meant compromising ideals? The contract's signature line waited, blank and promising. Olivia remembered the moment before her first major performance, that suspended breath before diving into the music. This felt similar, a point of no return, a choice that would reshape everything that followed. Her hand moved across the page. Her signature looked strange next to his, her artist's flourish beside his businessman's precision. As she dotted the I in her name, somewhere in the city a church bell tolled 9 times. Lucas gathered the papers efficiently, tucking them into his briefcase. "My assistant will contact you with the arrangements. We'll need to move quickly. The wedding should be within the month." Wedding. The word sounded foreign, disconnected from this quiet morning transaction. Olivia looked down at her hand, still holding the pen. No ring, no proposal on bended knee, no promises of eternal love. Just a signature on a contract, trading one form of security for another. As they stood to leave, the barista changed the radio station again. The opening notes of Wagner's Wedding March drifted through the cafe, an irony that almost made Olivia smile. She left her coffee untouched, the foam design now completely dissolved into a formless swirl. Outside, the city continued its morning dance, crowds rushing past, traffic humming, snippets of conversation floating on the breeze. None of these strangers knew that here, in this quiet cafe, 2 lives had just been bound together by ink and paper, for better or worse, for reasons having nothing to do with love. The courthouse wedding lasted exactly 12 minutes. Olivia wore a cream-colored dress from her closet, while Lucas arrived in one of his standard charcoal suits. Their witnesses were his assistant and the courthouse clerk. No rings were exchanged. Lucas had deemed them unnecessary for their arrangement, though he'd purchased an elegant diamond band for public appearances. Her new home sprawled across 3 acres in Greenwich, Connecticut. The mansion boasted 14 bedrooms, a pool house, tennis courts, and manicured gardens that employed 4 full-time gardeners. Olivia's rooms occupied the east wing, as far from Lucas's quarters as the architecture allowed. Her belongings, what little she'd brought, looked almost comical in the massive space, like a child's toys in an emperor's palace. The staff treated her with politeness, addressing her as Mrs. Sinclair while avoiding direct eye contact. She learned their choreographed morning routine. Breakfast served at 7 in the morning room, newspapers precisely folded, coffee at exactly 165 degrees. Lucas rarely joined her, preferring to eat in his study while reviewing patient files. They established their rules through brief, businesslike conversations. She would attend 3 social events per month. They would arrive together at functions, stand close enough to suggest intimacy, and he would rest his hand at the small of her back when photographers were present. She learned to laugh at his jokes during dinner parties, to gaze at him with practiced adoration while he discussed his medical breakthroughs with colleagues. Their performance proved convincing. "You two are simply magical together," gushed the hospital board chairman's wife at a fundraiser. If only she could see how Lucas and Olivia passed each other in hallways without a word, or ate silent dinners separated by acres of mahogany table. The grand piano in the music room remained untouched. Olivia would stand in the doorway sometimes, studying its gleaming surface, but never dared to lift the lid. The instrument probably cost more than her entire year's earnings from teaching, yet it sat silent, like everything else in this mausoleum of a house. 3 months into their arrangement, the annual Children's Hospital charity event arrived. Olivia wore a midnight blue gown selected by Lucas's stylist, her hair swept up to display the diamond necklace he'd provided for the evening. Her role was clear: smile, charm the donors, and make everyone believe in their perfect marriage. The event proved more challenging than usual. Lucas's grandmother attended, her shrewd eyes following their every move. They'd perfected their act, the way he would whisper in Olivia's ear, how she would rest her head against his shoulder during slow dances. But Margaret Sinclair had built an empire by seeing through people's deceptions. "Tell me, dear," she cornered Olivia by the champagne fountain, "what made you fall in love with my grandson?" Olivia recited her prepared answer about his brilliance and compassion. The older woman's eyes narrowed, unconvinced. Later, Olivia overheard her questioning Lucas about their living arrangements, about future children. Each probe threatened to unravel their careful fabrication. By the time they returned home, the strain had wrapped around them like steel wire. Lucas loosened his bow tie, pouring himself 3 fingers of scotch in his study. Olivia started toward her wing, her heels clicking loudly as she walked, when his voice stopped her. "Wait," he said, an unfamiliar note in his voice. "There's something I've been meaning to ask." She turned, watching him swirl the amber liquid in his crystal glass. The study suited him: leather-bound medical journals, awards mounted on mahogany panels, everything arranged to perfection. "The piano in the music room," he said. "Why don't you play it?" The question caught her off guard. "I didn't think you'd want me to. It's foolish to waste talent." He gestured toward the connecting door. "Play something, please." She followed him into the music room, where moonlight spilled through arched windows. The piano waited, its polish reflecting the crystal chandelier above. Olivia approached it like a wild animal that might startle, settling onto the bench with trembling fingers. The keys felt like old friends beneath her hands. She began with Chopin, letting muscle memory guide her through patterns she knew pretty well. But as the music flowed, it transformed into something else, her own composition, born from months of silent dinners and empty halls. The melody spoke of everything they never said: her loneliness in this cage she had given herself, his isolation in his self-made fortress. The music swelled, filling the space between them with raw emotion that no contract could contain. Her fingers painted their story across black and white keys, two people playing at marriage while hiding from real connection. When the final note faded, Olivia realized tears had spilled down her cheeks. She couldn't remember the last time she'd truly played, letting the music carry her emotions instead of burying them beneath practiced smiles. Lucas stepped closer, his shoes silent on the Persian rug. His hand moved toward her face, hesitant, as if approaching a rare butterfly. His thumb brushed away a tear, and in that touch was every moment of genuine feeling they'd denied themselves these past months. Time suspended between one breath and the next. The careful walls they'd built, the professional distance they'd maintained, all of it dissolved in the lingering echo of her music. When their lips met, it wasn't their usual public performance. This kiss contained no audience, no photographers, no social obligations. It shattered every clause in their contract, every rule they'd established. Yet neither pulled away. In that moment, surrounded by moonlight and the ghost of melody, they weren't Dr. and Mrs. Sinclair, the power couple who graced charity events. They were simply Lucas and Olivia, two people who had tried to turn marriage into a business arrangement, only to discover that some emotions refused to be confined to contract terms. In a few minutes, they were lost in a moment that they shouldn't have enjoyed. Who said fate didn't have a sense of humor? In a few weeks, Olivia sat in her doctor's waiting room, surrounded by expectant mothers. Their joy felt like a cruel joke. She'd accepted her infertility years ago. Yet here she was, clutching a paper bag that held 3 positive pregnancy tests, waiting for confirmation of what should have been impossible. The morning sickness had started 2 weeks after that night with Lucas. She dismissed it as stress, as anxiety, as anything but what it actually was. Even as she missed her cycle, even as her body changed, she refused to believe. The first home test had sent her into such shock that she'd bought 2 more, certain there must be some mistake. Dr. Noah's office looked exactly as it had 3 years ago, when she'd delivered the devastating confirmation about Olivia's infertility. The same anatomy charts lined the walls, the same ficus plant drooped in the corner, the same box of tissues waited on the desk. The ultrasound revealed everything. 2 distinct heartbeats pulsed on the grainy screen, strong and impossible and absolutely real. Dr. Noah kept saying words like miracle and unprecedented, but Olivia barely heard her through the roaring in her ears. Twins. She was carrying twins. Walking through the mansion's halls afterward felt like moving through water. The test results burned in her handbag, their implications threatening to drown her. She found herself in the music room, staring at the piano where everything had changed. Her fingers traced the keys without pressing them, remembering how Lucas's hands had moved over her skin that night. The drive to his clinic took 45 minutes. Spring rain misted the windshield, turning traffic lights into watery stars. Olivia rehearsed her words 100 different ways. But how do you tell a man who orchestrated every minute of his life that the impossible had happened? His secretary recognized her, offering a practiced smile as she announced Mrs. Sinclair's arrival. Olivia heard muffled voices, then the sharp click of a phone being set down. When she entered his office, Lucas sat behind his massive desk, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed patient charts. The results trembled in her hands as she placed them before him. She watched his eyes scan the paper once, twice, 3 times. His face drained of color. The pen he held snapped in his grip, blue ink staining his fingers. His explosion came in waves. First ice, then fire. His hands slammed against the desk hard enough to rattle his medical degrees on the wall. The accusation in his voice cut deeper than any scalpel. What did you do? Olivia pressed her palm against her stomach, an instinctive shield. The babies beneath her hand knew nothing of contracts or complications. They were simply growing, defying medical science and their father's carefully constructed world. Lucas's rage filled the office as he paced between windows. 3 years of marriage certificates hung on his wall, couples he'd helped achieve their dream of parenthood. Yet when that miracle touched his own life, he recoiled as if burned. His laughter scraped against the walls, bitter and hollow. Each word struck like hail: nightmare, disaster, impossible. He raked his fingers through his perfectly styled hair until it stood on end, transforming the polished doctor into someone wild and unfamiliar. The neat stack of papers on his desk scattered as he swept his arm across it. Patient files rained around them, other couples desperate for what had happened to them by accident. The irony might have been funny if it hadn't been so cruel. Olivia watched him unravel, this man who measured life in percentages and success rates. His entire identity centered on controlling nature's most fundamental process. Now that same process had ambushed him in his own marriage, mocking his expertise with not one but two heartbeats. His words ricocheted off the floors. My entire life is built on control, on planning every detail. I don't want children. I never wanted children. Each declaration stripped away another layer of the man she'd glimpsed that night at the piano. In his place stood the doctor who had first proposed their arrangement, cold, strict, seeing children as variables rather than miracles. Through the office windows, spring rain continued to fall. Somewhere in the building, other couples received news of their fertility treatments, joy or heartbreak delivered in invented medical terms. None of them could imagine this scene, the renowned fertility specialist raging against the very thing he helped others achieve. You're supposed to be infertile. Olivia's hand remained on her stomach, feeling the slight swell that had already begun. These babies didn't care about contracts or plans. They had nestled beneath her heart, turning medical impossibility into reality, transforming a business arrangement into something messier and more profound. The room fell quiet except for Lucas's ragged breathing. Papers littered the floor like fallen leaves. Outside his office, phones rang and nurses chatted and life continued its ordinary rhythm. But inside, everything had shifted on its axis. Olivia rose slowly from her chair. Her voice emerged steady despite the earthquake in her chest. I didn't do anything. I'm just as shocked as you are. The words stayed floating between them, honest and inadequate. What else could she say? That she'd spent years accepting she'd never have this? That she'd chosen their marriage precisely because children weren't supposed to be possible? Lucas braced himself against his desk, head bowed. His next words emerged through clenched teeth. This changes everything. He was right, of course. Their careful arrangement lay in pieces around them, shattered by two tiny heartbeats that refused to follow their rules. No contract could have prepared them for this moment, when the impossible rewrote every clause they'd so carefully crafted. Olivia gathered her purse, her movements measured and calm despite the storm inside her. As she reached the door, she paused. You're right. This changes everything. But it has already happened, and no amount of anger will make it unhappen. She left him there, surrounded by scattered papers and broken plans. In the elevator, she pressed her forehead against the cool metal wall, finally allowing her tears to fall. Their contract had accounted for everything except this, the moment when nature overruled all their careful provisions, replacing ink on paper with blood and bone and beating hearts. May brought morning sickness and endless medical appointments. June arrived with the first visible curve of Olivia's stomach and Lucas's increasing obsession with control. By July, the mansion had transformed into a medical ward, complete with daily monitoring equipment and a live-in nurse who reported every detail to Lucas. He scheduled her days like they were his own personal appointments. Breakfast at 7, organic vegetables, hormone-free eggs, prenatal vitamins arranged in exact rows. Exercise at 9, precisely 30 minutes of approved movement under the watchful eye of a personal trainer. Rest at 11, lunch at 1, doctor's appointments at 3. The nursery renovation halted midway through. Lucas refused to acknowledge its existence. Instead, he converted the space into a medical monitoring room, filling it with equipment that beeped and measured and quantified. Each night, he studied the readouts like stock market data, searching for anomalies in the graphs of heartbeats and hormone levels. His cousin Damien materialized at every social function, green eyes gleaming with malice. The whispers began at a hospital fundraiser, spreading through the crowd like poison. "Quite convenient, isn't it?" Damien murmured to the board chairman's wife. "An infertile woman suddenly carrying twins? Makes one wonder about timing and paternity." The rumors multiplied. At charity galas, conversations stopped when Olivia entered rooms. Women who had once fawned over her now exchanged knowing looks behind raised glasses. Men studied her growing belly with calculating eyes, as if measuring months against mathematics. Lucas ordered the first paternity test at 16 weeks, the second at 18, the third at 20. Each time, the results confirmed what Olivia already knew, yet still he doubted. He hired private investigators to track her movements before their marriage, demanding explanations for every male name in her past. Margaret Sinclair summoned them to the family estate in August. The mansion's oak-paneled study smelled of old money and inheritance. Family portraits stared down from the walls, generations of Sinclairs with Lucas's sharp features and cold eyes. His grandmother sat like a queen on her leather chair, each silver hair perfectly placed. Her voice carried decades of authority. "Explain these rumors, Lucas. Your reputation, our family's reputation, cannot withstand scandal." Olivia stood by the window, watching butterflies dance through Margaret's prize roses. Her hand rested on her stomach, feeling the twins move beneath her heart. 22 weeks along, and already they had such distinct personalities. One calm, one restless, both completely real despite their father's denial. She had come to the office that afternoon to share their latest ultrasound photos. The babies had finally revealed their genders, a boy and a girl. For a moment, she'd imagined this news might soften Lucas's heart, might make him see them as more than an inconvenience to his plans. Instead, she heard his voice through the partially opened door, cold and dismissive as he answered his grandmother's demands. This was supposed to be just business. "I never wanted children, just the inheritance." The ultrasound photos slipped from her fingers, fluttering to the floor like fallen leaves. In black and white, her children floated like astronauts, unaware that their father had just denied them. Again, that evening, Olivia moved through the mansion sadly and quietly. She packed essentials into a single suitcase: comfortable clothes, prenatal vitamins, the small photo album of ultrasound pictures. Her fingers brushed the piano keys one last time, remembering the night when everything changed. The note she left was brief: no accusations, no anger, just 5 words that ended their business arrangement as cleanly as it had begun. She placed her wedding ring beside it, the diamonds catching the last light of sunset. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory: "Sometimes loving yourself means walking away." The twins moved inside her, as if agreeing. They would have love, even if it came from only one parent. They would have music and laughter and acceptance, even without wealth or status. The taxi arrived at midnight. Through the rear window, Olivia watched the mansion shrink into darkness. The perfect rooms, the medical equipment, the controlled environment, all of it fading like a sterile dream. Her hands cradled her stomach, feeling the flutter of tiny feet. Inside her purse, her phone lit up with messages. Lucas's name flashed across the screen, again and again. Each call represented another attempt to manage the situation, to regain control over variables that had spun beyond his calculations. But some equations couldn't be solved with logic. Some bonds went deeper than business contracts. Some betrayals cut too deep for reconciliation. The twins moved beneath her hands, writing their own story in a language their father had never bothered to learn. The city lights blurred as tears filled her eyes. Not for the mansion or the luxury or the lost inheritance, but for the moment at the piano, when she'd glimpsed a different man beneath Lucas's careful mask. For the brief hope that love might mean more to him than ledgers and bottom lines. Her mother's small apartment welcomed her home, smelling of Earl Grey tea and fresh sheets. No medical equipment monitored her sleep. No nurses recorded her movements. Yet somehow, wrapped in worn quilts that held generations of family memories, Olivia finally felt safe. The twins danced their midnight ballet beneath her heart, free from their father's charts and graphs. They would arrive in their own time, bringing chaos to careful plans, writing love stories in place of business contracts. And she would be ready, not with wealth or status or medical precision, but with open arms and an open heart. In the morning, headlines would splash across medical journals. Renowned fertility specialist's wife vanishes. Society columns would buzz with speculation. Lucas would discover her absence when his morning reports showed no vital signs on his precious monitors. But for now, Olivia slept peacefully, one hand resting on her growing belly. The note lay on his desk, 5 words replacing their 40-page contract. You wanted a business arrangement. Consider this my resignation. 3 weeks passed without Olivia. Lucas wandered the empty mansion like a ghost, his footsteps echoing through halls that seemed to stretch endlessly. The medical equipment stood silent. The monitors displayed flat lines where once they had tracked his children's heartbeats. Each morning, he opened his laptop to review security footage, searching every frame for clues he might have missed. His private investigators returned with dead ends and maybes. Her mother's apartment sat empty, sold 2 weeks before Olivia's departure. Her old friends claimed ignorance. The community center, where she taught piano lessons, had no forwarding address. Sleep evaded him. Food lost its taste. His perfectly ordered world collapsed into chaos as memories ambushed him at every turn. The piano gathered dust, its silence an accusation. The half-finished nursery mocked him with its abandoned potential. His patients noticed the change. The legendary Dr. Sinclair missed appointments, lost focus during consultations, stared out windows instead of reviewing charts. Nurses whispered about the dark circles under his eyes, the tremor in his usually steady hands. The inheritance he'd fought so hard to protect meant nothing now. His grandmother's disapproval felt distant and hollow compared to the absence of Olivia's morning tea ritual, the empty space where her shoes should have lined the hallway. He found himself standing in the medical supply room, surrounded by the equipment he'd used to monitor every aspect of her pregnancy. Each machine represented his desperate attempt to control something that should have been celebrated. He'd treated his own children like a medical anomaly instead of a miracle. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A young receptionist at his clinic mentioned a new music therapy program for children with disabilities. "The teacher is amazing," she said. "She plays piano even though she's quite pregnant with twins." Lucas's heart stopped. The address led him to a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, its brick walls adorned with musical notes painted in primary colors. Through the window, he saw children gathered around a piano, their faces bright with joy. And there she was. Olivia sat at the piano, her belly now prominent beneath a flowing black dress. Her hair caught morning light as she guided a young boy's hands over the keys. The music drifted through the glass, simple scales transformed into something magical by her teaching. The children's laughter reminded him of the ultrasound videos he'd analyzed so clinically, his son rolling, his daughter stretching, their movements like a dance he'd been too blind to appreciate. He'd measured their growth in centimeters when he should have been measuring it in wonder. His hand trembled as he reached for the door. The bell chimed as he entered, and the music stopped. Children turned to stare at the stranger in his expensive suit. But Lucas saw only Olivia, her hands frozen over the keys, her eyes wide with recognition. The words he'd rehearsed 1,000 times vanished. Instead, raw truth poured out, his regret, his fear, his love. He spoke of sleepless nights spent realizing how wrong he'd been. Of morning sickness, he should have soothed instead of documented. Of tiny heartbeats that should have filled him with joy instead of anxiety. Parents gathered their children, sensing the private drama unfolding. But Lucas didn't care about his public image anymore. His carefully constructed walls crumbled as he confessed how empty his controlled life had become without her chaos in it. His phone felt heavy in his hand as he dialed his grandmother's number. The speaker crackled in the quiet room. Margaret Sinclair's voice carried decades of power and expectations, but Lucas felt none of his usual intimidation. His declaration echoed off brick walls. He was surrendering everything. The inheritance, the estate, the empire his grandmother had built. The ambitions that had driven him since childhood fell away, worthless compared to the family he'd nearly lost. If this is what it will take, so be it. Olivia's hands moved to her stomach, like she was protecting their children from something. But her eyes held questions instead of accusations. The distance between them felt both infinite and microscopic. He crossed the room slowly, giving her time to refuse him. His knees met the wooden floor as he knelt beside the piano bench. His fingers reached toward her belly, hesitant, asking permission to touch the miracle he'd once rejected. The twins kicked against his palm, strong and real and impossible. He remembered the medical texts that said Olivia couldn't conceive, the statistics he'd quoted so confidently. His children had rewritten every certainty, broken every rule, shown him that life's greatest gifts came from surrendering control. Through the windows, morning sunlight painted rainbow patterns on the floor. Children's artwork decorated the walls, stick figures holding hands, hearts drawn in crayon, music notes dancing across paper. This place held more warmth than his sterile mansion ever had. Olivia's hand covered his, their fingers intertwining over the lives they'd created. No contracts bound them now. No business arrangements dictated their future. They had only truth between them, messy, complicated, beautiful truth. His grandmother's voice still echoed from the phone, demanding explanations. But Lucas focused on the symphony before him. Olivia's steady breathing, their children's movements, the quiet music of second chances. The choice stood clear, a legacy of wealth and power, or a legacy of love and family. He chose love. Finally, irrevocably, he chose love. The formal dining room had transformed into an impromptu playground, with colorful mats spread across Italian marble and plastic toys scattered among priceless antiques. Little Emma crawled determinedly toward the grand piano, while Alexander attempted to scale his father's leg. The changes in the house mirrored the changes in Lucas. His suits now bore traces of baby food and drool. The medical journals on his desk shared space with parenting books and photo albums. The strict schedule he once lived by had surrendered to the chaotic rhythm of twin babies. Every morning brought new discoveries. Emma had her mother's musical instincts, banging happily on piano keys while Olivia played. Alexander inherited his father's analytical mind, studying each toy with serious concentration before figuring out how it worked. The medical monitoring room stood empty now, its equipment donated to the hospital's prenatal unit. In its place, a proper nursery bloomed with hand-painted butterflies and musical notes. The twins' cribs faced each other, allowing them to communicate in their secret language of gurgles and giggles. Lucas's grandmother had kept her word. The inheritance went to a cousin. The family estate sold to developers. Yet the loss of his expected legacy brought unexpected freedom. He reduced his clinic hours, referring patients to colleagues, so he could spend afternoons with his children. The man who once measured success in medical breakthroughs now counted it in first words and wobbly steps. Olivia's music therapy center flourished. 3 times a week, she brought the twins to watch her teach. They absorbed the joy of children learning to express themselves through music, their small faces lighting up at each new song. On those days, Lucas would leave work early, arriving just in time to see his family surrounded by melody and laughter. The medical community whispered about Dr. Sinclair's transformation. The cold perfectionist who had built his reputation on control now wrote papers about the miraculous exceptions to medical certainties. His waiting room featured a piano where patients could play, and his office walls displayed children's artwork alongside his medical degrees. Their love story became legend at the hospital. Nurses shared it with anxious couples waiting for fertility treatments. The tale of the doctor who learned to believe in miracles through his own impossible children. Some called it fate. Others called it destiny. Lucas called it the best mistake he never planned. Each evening brought its own symphony. Bath time created splashing percussion, accompanied by squeals and giggles. Bedtime stories added gentle narration, with Lucas doing different voices for each character. Olivia's lullabies provided the perfect finale, her fingers dancing across piano keys while tiny eyelids drooped. The twins grew like wildflowers in a garden that had once permitted only carefully cultivated roses. They knocked over Ming vases and drew on imported wallpaper. They filled silent halls with echoing laughter and transformed austere rooms into wonderlands of imagination. Evidence of their invasion appeared everywhere. Finger paintings hung beside centuries-old portraits. Building blocks mingled with crystal sculptures. The kitchen, once a showcase of stainless steel precision, now housed mismatched sippy cups and plastic plates decorated with cartoon characters. Lucas learned to measure days in moments instead of minutes. The way Emma's face scrunched up when she concentrated on stacking blocks. How Alexander's eyes lit up at the sight of his mother. The perfect weight of both babies sleeping against his chest while Olivia played piano in the evening light. Their first birthday party broke every rule of Sinclair social events. Instead of champagne and caviar, there were juice boxes and birthday cake. Classical quartet replaced by Old MacDonald. Society photographers supplanted by a dozen parents armed with smartphones, capturing every messy, joyful moment. The babies smashed their cakes with enthusiastic abandon. Emma conducted the singing with sticky fingers. Alexander methodically deconstructed his presents, more interested in the boxes than their contents. Olivia played Happy Birthday with extra flourishes while Lucas recorded everything, his surgeon's hands slightly shaky with emotion. That night, after the chaos subsided and tiny sugar crashes led to early bedtime, Lucas found the old contract in his desk drawer. The formal language and careful clauses seemed absurd now, like trying to contain an ocean in a teacup. He carried it to the music room, where Olivia sat playing soft melodies in the moonlight. Together they fed the pages into the fireplace, watching their business arrangement turn to ash. Each clause curled and blackened, releasing them from rules they'd long since abandoned. The flames reflected in Olivia's eyes as she smiled, remembering the woman who had signed that contract, so afraid, so guarded, so unaware of the joy ahead. Their marriage certificate hung in its place, but now accompanied by finger paintings, ultrasound photos, and family portraits that showed their evolution. The formal pose of their courthouse wedding stood beside images of messy family breakfasts and impromptu dance parties. In quiet moments after the twins slept, they would sit at the piano together. Sometimes Olivia played while Lucas held her. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, listening to the monitor's soft transmission of baby breaths. Their love had bloomed from the ashes of a business arrangement, proving that life's greatest symphonies often arose from unplanned melodies. The story ended the way all the best stories do, not with perfection, but with truth. A truth made of midnight feedings and morning kisses, of tiny hands and huge revelations, of a love that rewrote every contract to include only one clause: forever. Rate this story in the comments below. If this story gave you a fresh perspective, drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to smash that like button and hit subscribe so you never miss out on more stories that challenge the way we see the world. Let's keep sharing, learning, and growing together. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.